Hello, and welcome to Fear Noir. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently guide you into the darkness, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the noise of the outside world to slowly fade away. Tonight, beyond the silence, a story waits in the shadows. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and let the darkness carry you into Fear Noir. Story 1. I don't know how to explain what's been happening to me, so I'm going to write it the way it happened and let you decide what it means. 3 weeks ago, I found a small door behind my bathroom mirror. Not a medicine cabinet, not a hidden shelf, a door about 2 feet wide, set into the wall like it had been built there on purpose and then covered up. I still don't understand how I missed it. I've lived in this apartment for 2 years. I stand in front of that mirror every morning. I brush my teeth there, I shave there, I've wiped steam off it with my sleeve. I've leaned close enough to see every pore on my face, and I never once thought to push it. That night, I don't even remember why I touched it. It was such a small thing, like my hand moved before I decided to. I pressed my fingertips along the edge of the frame, felt a seam that shouldn't have been there, and the mirror shifted outward with a quiet, sticky sound, like paint pulling free. Behind it, exactly where there should have been drywall, was a small door. I stared at it for a long time. It looked old. The paint matched the wall, but it had been painted over so many times that the edges were rounded, like the door had been swallowed by layers. There was no knob, just a shallow cutout where you could hook your fingers. When I opened it, I expected dust. I expected insulation, maybe a forgotten electrical panel. Instead, I found a notebook. It was tucked inside like someone had placed it there carefully and shut the door on it, expecting it to stay hidden. The cover was plain and dark, the kind you might buy at a pharmacy, but there, written in clear block letters, was my name. My name. I stood on the bathroom tile, holding it with both hands, and I remember thinking that I must have bought it and forgotten. That was the easiest explanation, except I don't forget things like that. I need you to understand something about me before I keep going. I'm not a forgetful person. I'm the opposite. I remember faces, conversations, tiny details most people lose. I remember the name of a kid I sat next to in 3rd grade. I remember the smell of my first apartment building's lobby. My memory has always been the one thing I trusted without question. So when I opened that notebook and started reading and realized I had no memory of writing any of it, something shifted inside me. It wasn't fear exactly. Fear is sharp. Fear is a spike of adrenaline. This was heavier, colder. It was the feeling you get when you realize the ground under you isn't as solid as you thought. Like you've been walking on a floor that isn't actually attached to the building. The first entry was dated 14 months ago, March 3rd. The sound came back tonight. I don't want to write about the sound. I read that line once and frowned, because it didn't spark anything in me. No memory, no emotion, no recognition. It was like reading someone else's diary. Then I read the date again and tried to place myself on that day. Nothing. I don't mean I forgot what I ate or what I watched on TV. I mean the day itself didn't exist. When I reached for it, there was nothing there. A blank space. A missing slab in the timeline of my life. I flipped to the next page. Another date, another entry, another day I couldn't find in my mind. And then the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every date in that notebook matched a day I could not remember. Every single one. Weeks and weeks of my life. Just missing, and I had never noticed because the days around them were still there. My brain had kept the shape of the calendar intact. It had quietly closed the gaps and moved on like nothing happened. I kept reading because I couldn't stop. part of me wanted to slam the notebook shut and shove it back behind the mirror, pretend it didn't exist, but I didn't. I read faster, almost angry, like if I got through it quickly I could make it less real. April 17th. I tried to call my sister today. I don't know why I couldn't finish dialing. That made my throat tighten. I don't have a sister. I'm almost certain I don't have a sister. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at that line until my eyes started to blur. I tried to think of my childhood. I tried to picture family photos, holidays, birthdays. I tried to imagine a sister standing next to me in any moment I could remember. There was no one. Just empty space where someone should have been if that were true. I told myself it could be a metaphor, a dream, a mistake. Maybe I wrote it half asleep, but the handwriting was mine. The phrasing sounded like me. Even the way the sentence broke felt like how I write when I'm rushing. I turned the page. June 2nd. The light is wrong again. It's always the same in here. I've stopped checking what time it is because it doesn't seem to matter. I lowered the notebook and looked out into my apartment. The lights were on. The lamps. The ceiling fixture in the living room. That soft yellow glow I always kept because overhead lighting makes everything look harsh. It looked normal, and yet, as soon as I read that line, I noticed something I hadn't been able to put into words before. The light in my apartment didn't change much. Not really. It always felt flat, like the same late afternoon shade no matter what time it was. I tried to remember the last time I watched sunlight move across the floor, the way it shifts from morning to noon to evening, the way shadows stretch and shrink. I tried to remember standing by the window and seeing bright noon glare or the warm orange of sunset. I couldn't find any of it. I could remember being in the apartment. I could remember the couch, the kitchen counter, the exact squeak of the bedroom door. But I couldn't find a memory of different light. It was always the same quality, the same tone, like the world outside my windows was stuck. That should have been impossible. I work from home sometimes. I'm home enough to notice the day moving. But what if I hadn't? My fingers dug into the notebook cover as if holding it tighter would keep me from slipping. I turned the page again. August 9th. I found the door again. I always find it, and then something happens, and I forget. I think I'm supposed to forget. I think that's the whole mechanism. I read it once and my stomach turned. I read it again and my hands started to sweat. I read it a third time, standing barefoot on the cold bathroom tile, and the words began to feel less like writing and more like a message pushed through time. I always find it. How many times had I stood here? How many times had I opened this hidden door, found this notebook, read these entries, felt this same crawling realization, and then lost it completely? How many times had I walked away and never known I'd been here? The notebook said I always find it, which meant this wasn't my first time. I reached my hand back into the space behind the mirror, past the small door, feeling along the inside like I was searching for a loose wire or a hidden latch. The air back there was cooler, like it came from somewhere deeper in the wall. My fingertips brushed rough plaster and then something smooth and flat, paper, taped against the back corner so neatly I almost missed it. I pulled it free, a scrap of paper with a phone number written on it in my handwriting. Underneath it, 2 words, also in my handwriting. Don't forget. My hands were shaking now, not slightly. Actually shaking. I didn't notice until I saw the paper trembling between my fingers like it was alive. I sat on the bathroom floor and stared at the number, trying to make myself dial it. I didn't. I still don't know why I didn't. I tell myself it was instinct, that some part of me wasn't ready for whatever was on the other end. But the truth is, I just froze. The notebook had already rearranged the way I understood my own mind. Calling that number felt like stepping off a ledge. So instead, I did the thing that felt safer, even though it wasn't safe at all. I kept reading. The entries got shorter as they went on. The handwriting got smaller and shakier, like whoever wrote them was exhausted, terrified, or running out of time. October 14th, I think I understand what this is now. I really wish I didn't. The sentence ended there. No explanation, no details, just that. I swallowed and flipped the page. November 1st, I tried the door at the end of the hallway. It doesn't open from this side. I can hear things through it sometimes. Voices, machinery. My first reaction was simple confusion. I live in an apartment. I don't have a hallway that ends in a door. I had a short hallway, sure. Bathroom on one side, bedroom on the other. Then it opened into the living room. That was it. I stood up slowly and stepped out of the bathroom like I expected the apartment to look different. Like I expected walls to have shifted while I was reading. The hallway was there, and at the end of it was a door I had never seen in my life. It was painted white, the same shade as the walls. The handle was a small silver lever. It looked like it belonged there. That was part of the horror, how ordinary it looked. How easy it would be for your eyes to slide right over it if you weren't focusing. I walked toward it, and every step made my skin feel tighter, like my body knew I shouldn't be doing this. I put my hand on the handle. It was cold. Not metal in winter cold. Colder than anything in the apartment had any reason to be. The chills spread into my palm like the handle was pulling heat out of me. I tried to open it. It didn't move, not even a little. I leaned closer, ear near the seam, and listened. At first, I heard nothing. Then faintly, I heard something on the other side. Breathing. Slow. Steady. Mechanical in a way that didn't sound like a person, like something working to keep a rhythm going, like a machine that couldn't afford to lose its pace. I stepped back so fast my shoulder hit the wall. My heart was pounding. My mouth tasted like pennies. I went back into the bathroom, grabbed the notebook, and read the next pages as if the words could explain the door, as if they could give me a script for what to do next. The last entry was dated the same day I found the notebook, 3 weeks ago, and I had no memory of that day. We keep finding this and we keep forgetting, and I don't know how many loops we've been through. I stopped counting because counting made it worse. Call the number, that's all. Just call. I heard them talking through the door again last night. They're discussing stopping. I don't know what stopping means here, but I know it isn't good. I know if they stop, something ends. I read that part twice, then again, and the phrase, "we keep," hit me. We, not I. We keep finding this. We keep forgetting. That meant it wasn't just my mind slipping. It meant there was more than one of me involved, or at least more than one version of me. The person writing in that notebook didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like me, but it also sounded like someone who'd been fighting a long fight. Someone who'd lived through this more times than I could imagine. At the very bottom of the last page, there was one more line. It was so faint it almost looked like an indentation without ink, like the pen had barely touched paper. If you can read this, then you haven't come back yet. Please come back. I sat there staring at that line until my eyes started to burn. Please come back. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't instructions. It was a plea. And that's what finally got me to pick up the phone. I'm writing this now because I was terrified that if I didn't get it out of my head and put it somewhere permanent, I'd wake up tomorrow and it would be gone again. The notebook would feel unfamiliar. The door would vanish. The memory would seal itself up, like skin growing over a wound. The phone was sitting next to me. The number was in my hand. I was going to call. When I did, no one answered. But the moment the line connected, just for a second before it cut to silence, I heard it. That same mechanical breathing sound. The same rhythm I'd heard through the door at the end of the hallway. My entire body went numb in one wave. like my nervous system had decided it didn't want to handle any more information. I posted what I could right away because I needed someone else to see it. I needed proof outside my own mind. I needed someone to read it before I forgot. And then I looked back at the bathroom mirror. It was pushed slightly open, just enough to show the seam. And I had no memory of closing it after I found the notebook, which meant the forgetting had already started. At some point after that, things changed. Not like a dramatic movie moment where the world cracks open, but like waking up from a dream and realizing you've been holding your breath for hours. The truth is, none of that apartment was real. Or it was real in the only way dreams can be real, solid while you're inside them, convincing because you don't question the rules. I was in a coma. I'd been in a coma for 2 years after a car accident. My body was in a hospital bed the entire time, surrounded by machines that kept me alive. The mechanical breathing I heard through the hallway door wasn't something hiding in the wall. It was the ventilator doing its job. The voices weren't neighbors or strangers in an apartment building. They were doctors and nurses and my family talking near my bed. And somehow, somewhere underneath all the layers of the world I built inside my head, part of me knew. Part of me kept trying to leave clues for myself. The apartment was the world my brain made to survive being trapped. The routine was a way to keep me calm. My 2 years living there was my mind trying to make the impossible feel ordinary. It created stability because stability is what a person needs to stay sane. But the truth kept leaking through anyway. The small door behind the mirror was my mind's way of hiding something it couldn't fully face and still giving itself access to it. The notebook was my own attempt to document the missing time, to leave evidence that certain days were being erased. The door at the end of the hallway was the hospital room door. The handle that felt too cold was the feeling of reality pressing against the edges of the dream. The light that never changed was the hospital lighting, steady and flat, the kind of lighting that doesn't care what time it is. And that phone number, written with "Don't Forget" underneath it, was my mother's number, the one she's had for decades, the one I knew by heart in real life. But in there, inside the coma world, I couldn't remember it clearly enough to dial it. That part still makes me feel sick when I think about it. Not because it's tragic in a big dramatic way, but because it's such a simple human thing to lose. The ability to reach the person who loves you most. I woke up 4 days ago. The doctors say writing about it will help me process it, that giving it words might help my brain file it away properly instead of letting it echo around in my head. They say it's common for coma patients to have vivid internal experiences, that the mind tries to create structure, that it can loop, it can trap itself, it can build a whole life. I understand that. I can accept the explanation on paper. What I can't stop thinking about is that last line in the notebook. Please come back. I wrote that to myself. Somewhere deep inside me, some version of me was aware enough to beg. And the part that keeps me awake now is how close I came to not coming back. Because if I had forgotten one more time, if I had ignored the number again, if I had decided not to open the mirror door because it felt too strange, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know if the loop would have kept going forever, or if stopping meant my body would stop breathing and the dream would become the last thing I ever knew. I keep thinking about the calm life I built in that apartment, how normal it felt, how convincing it was, how sure I was that it was real. And I keep thinking about the moment I heard that mechanical breathing through the phone line, like the real world finally broke through for 1 second and reminded me where I actually was. I'm writing this down now while I still can, because there's a part of me that's scared. The forgetting wasn't only inside the coma. There's a part of me that worries my brain learned how to patch over holes too well. And I don't want to wake up one morning, look at my bathroom mirror, and feel that same cold certainty that there's a door behind it, Only this time there won't be a notebook, only an empty space where my life should be. Story 2. I don't really know how to explain this without sounding paranoid, but I'm going to try anyway because keeping it in my head is starting to feel worse than saying it out loud. I moved into this house about 3 months ago. It's in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people keep to themselves but still do the polite things. If you pass someone walking their dog, you get a nod. If someone is backing out of their driveway, you wave them through. It's calm. It's predictable. The streets are clean and the nights are dark enough that you can see the porch lights from far away. Nothing about it felt strange at first. That's part of why this has gotten under my skin. If the place had always felt creepy, I could blame it on the vibe. But it didn't. It felt normal, and I liked that. The house next to mine was empty when I moved in. It stayed that way for a couple of weeks. No lights on at night, no trash cans by the curb, no car in the driveway. Just an empty place with drawn blinds like it was waiting. Then one morning I looked out my window and there was a car parked there, just like that. No moving truck, no loud unloading, no neighbors talking in the driveway, no sign of anyone carrying in boxes or furniture. It wasn't like the usual move-in where you see activity for a whole day, the front door opening and closing, the back of a van hanging open. It was just suddenly occupied. I didn't think much of it. People move in quietly sometimes. Maybe he didn't have much stuff. Maybe he'd already brought things in little by little. Maybe he had help when I wasn't home. That evening I saw him for the first time. He was standing at his front door, just inside the frame, like he'd stepped out and decided to stop. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking at a package or checking his mailbox. He was only standing there, facing the street, not staring at anything specific, just looking out. I gave a quick wave because that's what you do. Friendly, simple, no pressure. He didn't wave back. He did smile, though. Slowly, like he was thinking about it first, like the expression had to travel a distance before it reached his face. It wasn't a warm smile. It didn't reach his eyes. It looked more like something he'd practiced. I went inside and tried to forget about it. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns. I only saw him outside at certain times. Early morning, right after sunset, and once in the middle of the night, around 2 or 3 a.m. I know that sounds like I'm watching him, but I'm not standing at the window with binoculars or anything. My bedroom window faces his driveway, and I haven't been sleeping well lately. I wake up for no reason, glance outside without thinking, and there he is. Every time it was the same thing. He'd come out, stand still, look around, and smile. That was it. No phone, no taking out trash, no pulling weeds, no going for a jog, no normal neighbor stuff. I never saw him carrying grocery bags, never saw a delivery, never saw anyone visit, no lights inside at night that moved from room to room like someone living a life. Just him appearing at the same times, standing like he was waiting for a signal, and smiling like he was trying to remember where to place his mouth. At first I chalked it up to weird habits. Maybe he worked nights. Maybe he had insomnia. Maybe he liked the quiet. People are odd. I've met enough strange neighbors in apartments to know that, but something about the way he stood there made it hard to shrug off. It didn't feel like someone enjoying fresh air. It felt like someone checking the world, like he was studying it. About a week after the car appeared, I decided to introduce myself. I told myself it would settle things. If he was just awkward, a quick hello would make it normal. I could stop thinking about him as the guy next door and start thinking of him as a person with a name who maybe just didn't understand social cues. I walked over in the afternoon and knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again, lighter this time, and waited. It took a while, long enough that I almost turned to leave, before I heard movement inside. Slow footsteps, but they didn't come straight toward the door. That's the part that made my neck go tight. The steps sounded like they were moving sideways, like someone circling around in the hallway instead of approaching directly. A pause, another step, a pause again, like he was trying to line up with the door from the correct angle. Then the door opened. Up close, nothing about him screamed, "Monster!" He looked normal, mid-30s maybe, clean hair, clean clothes, well-dressed in a way that was plain but intentional. His skin was smooth, his posture was straight. If I saw him in a grocery store, I wouldn't look twice. But the moment I looked at his face, I felt that wrongness again. His expression didn't match. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like his features were arranged into a human face, but the feeling behind them wasn't there. Like he knew what an expression should look like, but he wasn't actually experiencing it. Even his eyes seemed to hesitate, like they weren't sure where to settle. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual, like this was totally normal. "I live next door, just wanted to say hello." He stared at me for a second too long, not in a rude way exactly, more in a blank way, like he was processing each word separately. Then he said, "Hello." The tone was almost identical to mine, same pacing, same emphasis, like he'd copied the sound instead of answering. I gave a small, awkward laugh, the way you do when you're not sure what else to do. "Yeah, just thought I'd introduce myself." He blinked once, slow. Then he said, "Just thought I'd introduce myself." That was the moment my stomach dropped. It wasn't playful mimicry. It wasn't someone teasing. There was no smile in it, no sign that he understood what the words meant socially. It felt like repeating, like a recording played back. I stood there holding my breath, waiting for him to add anything, a name, a nice to meet you, anything. He didn't. The air between us felt thick, like the quiet had weight. I made an excuse I don't even remember and walked away. I didn't look back until I was almost at my own front door, and when I did, he was still standing in the doorway, watching me like he hadn't moved an inch. After that, I tried to ignore him. I really did. I focused on work. I kept my curtains more closed than usual. I stopped looking out my bedroom window at night. I told myself I was letting my imagination run wild, and that if I kept feeding it, it would get worse. But it's hard to ignore something when you start noticing what I can only call mistakes. One morning I saw him getting into his car. I was walking out to take the trash bin to the curb, and I noticed him across the way. He opened the driver's side door, paused like he'd forgotten what came next, then closed it again. He stood there for a second, still smiling, faintly. Then he opened it again, paused again, closed it again. He did it 5 or 6 times, like he was practicing the motion, trying to get the timing right, trying to make it look natural. Finally he got in, shut the door, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine, like he needed another second to remember the next step. I went back inside and told myself he was just distracted. Maybe he'd dropped something in the car. Maybe he was checking the lock. Maybe he had anxiety rituals. People do repetitive stuff. Still, I couldn't forget the way he'd paused each time, like he was waiting for an invisible cue. Another time, late at night, I saw him walking down the street, except he wasn't walking right. It wasn't a limp, it wasn't a stumble. It was more subtle than that. His steps were slightly off rhythm, too even, too careful. Heel, toe, like he was imitating walking from memory, the way a kid might mimic an adult when they're playing pretend. It was just a fraction too deliberate. The movement made the hairs on my arms lift, and I stood at my window watching until he disappeared around the corner, unable to explain why it scared me so much. The worst part started last week. I was on a call in my kitchen with a friend. I hadn't told many people about this because it sounded ridiculous when I tried to explain it. I could already hear the jokes. Maybe he's a vampire. Maybe he's just socially awkward. Maybe you're losing it. So I tried to keep it light on the phone. I laughed while I talked. I said things like, "It's probably nothing and he's just some weird guy." I even made fun of myself for being creeped out. That's when I noticed him through the kitchen window. He was standing in his driveway, facing my house, smiling. My windows were closed. The rain from earlier had left streaks on the glass. There's no way he could have heard my conversation. The kitchen is on the other side of my house, from where the street noise carries, and I wasn't speaking loudly, but his lips were moving. At first I thought he was talking to himself. Maybe he had a Bluetooth headset I couldn't see. Maybe he was on a call too. Then my friend paused, and I realized something that made my throat tighten. His mouth had been moving in sync with mine. Not perfectly, more like a second behind, like he was chasing my words, but close enough that I could tell he was matching the shapes, trying to copy the timing, trying to learn, like he was studying how I talk. I stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Outside, he stopped too. He didn't look confused. He didn't react like someone caught doing something embarrassing. He just held the smile and stared at my house, as if he was waiting for me to continue. My friend asked, "You there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I stared at him until my eyes started to burn. Then slowly he turned his head and looked down the street, like he'd completed his practice for the day. He walked inside without any hurry, without looking back. That night I left lights on. I checked the locks twice. I hated myself for it, but I did. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Coincidence. My brain lining things up. Paranoia, stress, lack of sleep, anything. Then last night happened. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound downstairs. Not a loud crash, not footsteps, just a soft, uneven tapping. It was the kind of noise that makes you wake fully because it doesn't belong. It was irregular enough that you can't tune it out. My heart was already beating too fast when I grabbed my phone. I didn't turn on all the lights. I don't know why. I guess some part of me didn't want to announce myself. I moved through the hall slowly, listening. Everything looked normal. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. No windows open, no alarms going off. The house was still. The tapping came again. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. It was coming from the kitchen window. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, staring at the glass. The darkness outside pressed against it like a wall. I held my phone up, the flashlight shaking slightly. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't tapping with something hard. It was fingernails, dragging and clicking from the outside. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. My stomach turned so hard I thought I might throw up right there on the tile. I forced myself to look through the glass. He was standing inches away from the window, close enough that I could see the shape of his smile clearly. His face looked almost normal in the dim light, but the expression was wrong again. Too controlled, too slow, like he was holding it in place because he knew people expected it. He stared right at me, and then, when he saw me, he lifted his hand and tapped the glass 3 times, copying the same pattern he'd been doing. Then he said something. I couldn't hear him through the window, but I could read his lips because he exaggerated the shapes like he wanted me to understand. What came out of his mouth was my voice. Not literally the sound, because I couldn't hear it, but the rhythm was mine. The timing was mine. The way the words formed was exactly the way I'd said them at his door. He mouthed, "Hi, I live next door." It hit me so hard that I stepped backward without meaning to. My heel caught on the edge of the rug, and I nearly fell. I didn't take my eyes off him, because I was afraid the moment I looked away he'd be gone, or worse, he'd be inside. He didn't move. He just stood there, smiling like he'd done something impressive. Eventually he turned and walked away from the window, smooth and calm, like he'd only stopped by to say hello. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in my living room until sunrise with every light on, my phone in my hand, listening for any sound that didn't fit. I kept thinking, he wasn't trying to break in. If he wanted to break the window, he could have. Instead, he tapped, like a signal, like a lesson, like practice. This morning, running on no sleep, I checked my front door camera. I told myself I was being dramatic, but I needed to see if he'd been on my porch too. At 2:17 a.m., there was motion. The camera footage loaded, and my stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. Someone was standing on my doorstep. Someone who looked like me. Same height, same build, same hoodie, even with the same stupid crease on the sleeve that never comes out no matter how you wash it. Same way of standing with weight slightly on one leg. The image wasn't blurry. It wasn't a shadow trick. It was clear. It looked like me, except the expression was wrong. That same slow smile, the same practiced stillness. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered. The thing that's been bothering me all day isn't just that it looked like me. If it had been trying to scare me, that would still be terrifying, but at least it would make a kind of sense. What bothers me is what it was doing. It wasn't knocking. It wasn't trying the handle. It wasn't checking for a key under the mat. It wasn't moving at all. It was just standing there, perfectly still, like it was waiting for something on the other side of the door to show it what to do next, like it didn't want to make a mistake, like it was learning. And now I can't stop thinking about that night at the kitchen window, him tapping in that pattern and copying my words. I don't think he's trying to get into my house yet. I think he's trying to get it right first. And the worst part is that if it really is learning me, my voice, my timing, my habits, then it won't need to break a window or force a lock. One day it'll just stand on the porch, smile the right way, knock like I knock, speak like I speak, and wait for someone inside to believe it belongs there. I keep replaying the video in my head, the way it stood on the doorstep like a paused frame, like it was waiting for permission. I haven't decided what to do next. Call the police and tell them my neighbor is copying my voice and wearing my clothes. Tell them I saw myself on my porch at 2 a.m. I can already hear how that would sound. So for now, I've done the only things that feel even a little useful. I've saved the footage. I've backed it up. I've kept the lights on. I've checked the locks so many times the metal is warm from my hands. And I'm trying not to look out the window, because tonight, if I see him standing in the driveway again, smiling at my house, I'm scared I'll notice that the smile is closer to mine than it was yesterday. Story 3. Before anyone starts freaking out, please relax. I'm not here to stir up some Civil War argument, and I'm not trying to cosplay politics. I was a Union reenactor. I portrayed a soldier with the 105th Ohio. I've never worn gray in my life. But uniform colors don't really matter once you've seen what I saw, because some of the scariest things I've ever experienced happened out there on a field that was supposed to be safe, staged, and controlled. I've tried to forget it. I've tried to laugh it off. I've tried to tell myself it was stress or exhaustion or a bad bump to the head. But it keeps coming back in pieces, especially at night, especially when things get quiet. It's hard to bring up with family or friends, because the second you say something that sounds even slightly unreal, people start looking at you like you're either joking or losing your grip. So I'm writing it here instead. If anyone has had anything even remotely similar happen, I'd honestly like to know, not because I want attention, because I'd like to feel less alone with it. Reenacting and living history attracts some of the best people you'll ever meet, and also some of the most unbearable. You get folks who are kind, generous, and excited to teach kids how things were made, how people cooked, how music sounded before electricity. And then you get the type who can't breathe unless they're correcting someone about a button pattern, or bragging about knowing the color of Sherman's tie at some battle no one in the public has even heard of. I've met people from every background you can imagine. Different ages, different politics, different personalities. It's not one single type of person. For every loud, good old boy, there are families who come out just to show old crafts and tell stories. For every hard-nosed ex-military guy obsessed with period-correct kit, there's a group of buddies who are there to shoot black powder, smoke cigars, and enjoy being outdoors. But no matter why people show up or how serious they take it, there's one thing almost everyone in the hobby quietly shares. We've all seen some weird stuff. I don't mean I heard a twig snap in the woods and got spooked. I mean real stories, the kind that get told in low voices around a campfire after the public has gone home, after the jokes are done, when the air gets cold and someone admits they don't like walking to the porta-john alone. Everybody has a ghost story. Everybody has something that happened to them. Most of us don't talk about it with outsiders, partly because a lot of it is probably nonsense. People exaggerating, people drinking, people wanting to sound interesting. But some stories don't feel like that. Some stories get told in a careful way, like the person isn't trying to impress anyone. They're just trying to explain something that still doesn't fit in their own head. And honestly, it's not surprising. A lot of events are held in or near state parks and old battle sites, places with long histories and deep woods and areas where cell service drops and sound carries strangely at night. If anything odd is going to happen, it makes sense it would happen out there. What happened to me wasn't a campfire tale I heard from an older guy. It happened to me, and I still feel stupid even typing that, because I know how it sounds. But I need to get it out of my system. This was at a siege-style reenactment, one of those events where there's an earthen fort and the finale is a big charge over the works. I was on a skirmish line with a rifle unit that day. Normally I did artillery, so I wasn't the smoothest with a long gun, but I was having fun. It was late in the program, late enough that the light had started to soften, and the crowd was waiting for the last big push. The mood was good. People were joking, slapping each other on the shoulder, checking their caps and gear. It's always loud and chaotic in a way that's still oddly organized. You hear commands, laughter, the snap and hiss of black powder, and that constant percussion of boots and bodies moving as a group. We advanced. The captain shouted the order to charge. Everybody broke into a run toward the battlements to give the spectators that big, dramatic finish. Smoke and shouting and rifle fire all around. That staged frenzy where you know it's fake, but your body still reacts like it's real. I didn't make it. I slipped. I'd just gotten new brogans and the soles were smooth as ice on grass. My foot hit a slick patch and I went down hard, sideways and fast. I hit the ground like someone had yanked my legs out from under me. Pine, straw, and leaves and dirt filled my mouth. I heard rifles cracking ahead of me, and for a second, all I could do was lie there and swear into the ground. No one came back for me. At first I thought, fine, they probably think I'm doing a dramatic hit. People do that all the time during the charge. Fall, clutch their chest, roll over, play dead until the public applause. It's part of the show. But the fall had rattled me. My head throbbed and my vision went a little weird. The noise around me started to feel distant, like someone had put cotton in my ears. The shouts blurred. The gunfire sounded muffled. My stomach rolled. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually the whole reenactment soundscape faded out like the volume was being turned down. I pushed myself up, dizzy, and tried to get my bearings. Something was wrong immediately. It was night, not late afternoon dim, not the sun is going down. I mean full deep night, like the sky had been black for hours. The woods were wrapped in darkness, and the air had that heavy quiet that comes after the world goes to sleep. My unit was gone. The fort was gone. The crowd was gone. The noise, the smoke, the whole event, gone. All I could see were trees, pine and oak in long, unnatural rows, not the random cluttered pattern you expect in a forest, but a strange order, as if the woods had been laid out on purpose. The ground sloped slightly, then leveled, then sloped again in a way that didn't match where the fort should have been. I turned in a slow circle. Nothing, no lanterns, no campfires, no sound of generators or distant voices, no road, not even a faint glow from a visitor center. I shouted the names of the guys I'd come with. I called out for the 105th. I yelled until my throat hurt. I walked in wide circles, then tighter ones, trying to find something familiar. I thought maybe I'd wandered farther than I realized after the fall. Maybe I'd gotten turned around. Maybe the concussion was messing with my sense of direction. But the woods just kept being woods, unbroken in every direction. Panic started creeping in. Not sudden, not dramatic. It came like cold water rising, a slow, sick realization that I didn't have my phone. We usually don't carry modern stuff on the field. I had no flashlight, no GPS, no easy way to call for help. I started shouting again, louder this time, and I hated how desperate my voice sounded. I was close to tears, grown man in costume on a public historical site, shaking like a lost kid, when I heard someone behind me. "Lost there, friend?" I spun around so fast I almost fell again. A man stood a few yards away wearing a blue coat, Union kit, similar gear to mine. In the moonlight he was mostly silhouette, dark shapes against darker trees. But the outline was familiar enough that my first feeling was relief so sharp it almost hurt. I told him I was glad to see him. I asked if he was with the Pennsylvania group we'd been camping near. He shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm with the 3rd Kentucky." That hit me as odd right away. I didn't remember a 3rd Kentucky unit on the roster. I didn't remember seeing their camp, their flags, their company street, but my mind was foggy and I was still trying to orient myself, so I pushed the thought aside. I asked him if he knew where everyone else was. He nodded and pointed off to the right, deeper into the trees. "We're all still here, friend," he said. "All still here down in the hollow." "The hollow?" I repeated, because I couldn't think of any hollow near where the fort had been. He didn't answer my question. He simply turned and started walking away like this was normal, like it was obvious I should follow. "Follow me, friend," he said. "Follow me, and we'll all be back together where we ought to be." I followed, but I didn't close the distance. I stayed a few yards behind him, leaning on my rifle as I walked. My head still hurt, and my legs felt weak. Every now and then I tried to ask another question. Where are the tents? Where is the road? What time is it? But he didn't respond normally. He just kept walking, steady and quiet. And every so often, like he couldn't help himself, he muttered the same line under his breath. "In the hollow is where we lay," he said, "and there we remain until the earth forgives us for what we did to it." It didn't sound like a joke. It didn't sound like reenactor banter. It sounded like something memorized long ago and repeated so many times it had become part of his breathing. The woods grew thicker. The air got colder. The ground under my boots felt softer, damp, like we were moving toward lower land. I watched the brush on either side, expecting other people to appear, expecting lantern light, expecting anything that looked like a campsite. Nothing. Then the man stopped at a dip in the land. He stood at the edge and stared down, his back to me, shoulders square as if he was looking over a battlefield. He raised one arm and pointed into the darkness. "Here," he said. I stepped up beside him and looked down. It wasn't a campsite. It wasn't even a clearing. It was a drop, a shallow ditch or ravine, like the earth had been scooped out. The ground sloped down into shadow, and I couldn't see the bottom clearly. The air coming from it smelled wrong, like wet soil and iron. "This ain't no camp," I said. "Where the hell is everyone?" He didn't get to answer. A saber flashed. For a fraction of a second, I saw steel catch moonlight, bright and clean. Then the man's head separated from his body so smoothly my brain couldn't understand it. His head tumbled into the dip like it was just another object dropped by accident. I made a sound that wasn't a word. My rifle slipped from my hands. A second man stood there now, stepping up from the hollow like he'd been waiting below. He wore muddy jean cloth and a gray hat. His clothes looked soaked and filthy, like he'd been rolling in the earth for days. He held the saber and adjusted his hat like it annoyed him. Then he leaned into the body and started hacking. Not a clean finishing blow, not a quick kill. He cut into the headless torso in violent, jagged swings, like he was angry at the very idea of it existing. I covered my mouth with both hands. My stomach lurched. The swordsman heard me. He turned his face toward my sound. The brim of his hat hid most of his features, but I could see enough to know he was gaunt, almost starved. His cheeks were sunken. His mouth looked too wide when he spoke. "You ain't supposed to be here," he said. "You ain't supposed to be here." He lifted the blade and staggered toward me. My legs went weak. I stumbled backward, trying to get distance, trying to convince my body to run. He moved in jerky steps like his joints didn't line up right. He kept muttering the same words again and again, as if that phrase was the only thing holding his mind together. "You ain't supposed to be..." He didn't finish. A bayonet burst through him from behind. The point came out of his chest like a sudden blooming, and he made a wet, choking sound. A blue coat was behind him, dragging him down as if the weight of the dead man was nothing. Then more figures started crawling out of the hollow, gray and blue, ragged uniforms, mud-caked faces. Some had rifles, some had knives, some had nothing but hands. They slammed into each other at the edge of the ditch and fought like animals. Rifle stocks cracking into skulls, bodies tackled into dirt, blades flashing in quick, ugly movements. It wasn't like a reenactment. It was messy. It was personal. It was silent in the wrong places, loud in others. I didn't hear anyone call commands. I didn't hear anyone laugh. I heard impact, scraping, choking, and the dull sound of bodies hitting ground. They dragged each other back into the hollow. That was the pattern. Every time someone fell, blue or gray, two others would grab them by the arms or ankles and haul them down into the ditch as if returning them to storage. The rebel swordsman was no different. Men grabbed his legs and dragged him backward over the edge, the bayonet and rifle still stuck through him like a pin through cloth. I stood there shaking, trying to make sense of it in the only way my mind could. Drugs, I thought, crazy people, some group living in the woods, some kind of sick performance. But even as I tried to force that explanation, I knew it didn't fit, because there was no shouting for help from the actors, no reaction to me like I was another person who could call 911. It was like I wasn't supposed to be a real presence there, like I was an accident that wandered in. I kept waiting for sirens, for flashlights, for a ranger, for anything that belonged to my world. Nothing came. Then I saw something that finally broke whatever frozen spell had me standing there. At the edge of the hollow, upright and still, stood the headless man who had led me there. He shouldn't have been standing. He shouldn't have been moving at all. But there he was, shoulders turning slightly, body angled toward me as if he could see without eyes. He lifted his arm and pointed down into the ditch. And I remembered what he'd been muttering the whole walk. In the hollow is where we lay, and there we remain until the earth forgives us for what we did to it. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I sprinted into the woods so hard my lungs burned. Branches whipped my face. Roots caught my boots. I fell once and barely felt it. I just got up and kept running because the only thought in my head was distance. Get away, get out. I don't know how long I ran. Time didn't feel normal. It felt stretched and broken. Eventually a bright light slammed into my face and I flinched so hard I nearly swung my rifle like a club. A ranger's flashlight, voices, real voices, my name being shouted. Guys from my unit rushing toward me, their faces pale, their hats crooked, their eyes wide. They got me sitting down, then standing, then walking, half carried. An ambulance was there. EMTs checked me over. while my buddies crowded close, talking all at once. The EMTs said I had a nasty bump on my head, probably a concussion. My pupils were off. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, but there was no bleeding, no broken bones, nothing that explained why I looked like I'd seen a massacre. My unit grilled me for answers. They told me something that made my stomach drop all over again. During the final part of the battle, they said I had disappeared. I'd been missing for 4 hours. They thought I'd wandered off dazed from the fall. They said they searched. They said they got park staff involved. They said nobody could find me until I stumbled out of the woods, like I'd been dropped there. I told them I didn't remember. I told them I must have gotten lost. I still tell them that. It's become a running joke now. Don't get lost like you know who. People laugh when they say it, and I laugh too because it's easier than explaining the truth. It's easier than watching someone's face change when they realize you aren't joking. After that, I stopped reenacting as much. I'll still do a festival here and there, mostly daytime stuff where there are crowds and noise and a normal schedule. But I don't like being out on those fields the same way anymore. Not when the light starts to fade and the woods start to look like they can swallow sound. I don't like thinking about what I saw. I've heard older guys tell their own stories over the years, and maybe someday I'll share a few of those too. For now, I'm just relieved to finally write this down somewhere outside my own head. If anything changes, if I learn anything new, I'll update. I don't know what else to do. Story 4. It's not really like me to talk about myself this openly, but my family keeps telling me I can't stay shut down forever. They want me to stop holding everything in, to stop keeping my memories locked away like they're dangerous. Maybe they are. Maybe that's why I've been quiet. No matter what doctors have said, no matter what medication I've been given, there are certain moments I can't erase. I can still feel them in my body when I think about them. I can still smell the air. I can still hear the sounds like they're happening in the next room. The last time I saw my aunt is one of those moments. It starts in 1995 in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I was a kid then, young enough that summer felt endless and every place felt bigger than it really was. Port-au-Prince was loud and alive in a way I had never felt in the States. There were motorbikes everywhere, weaving through streets like they owned them. People moved in groups, talking over each other, laughing, arguing, living like the heat didn't bother them. Houses were painted bright colors that would look strange anywhere else, but in Haiti they looked normal, like the city itself refused to be dull. Everything felt greener too. Plants pushed up through cracks. Trees leaned over walls. Even the air tasted different, like it carried more life in it. When I think back, I remember that more than anything, the feeling that the world had a pulse. Every summer, my mom would take me to visit family. It wasn't optional. It was just what we did. Back then, we spent a lot of time at my grandmother's place where the days had their own rhythm. Electricity wasn't reliable, especially during the day, so you learned to live without it. No humming air conditioner, no TV noise filling the room. Instead, there were voices, fans that barely worked, and the constant sound of the neighborhood outside. I remember sitting there while my grandma, my mom, and a couple of my aunties cooked dinner and talked non-stop. They made diri jonjon and legume, moving around each other in the kitchen like dancers who didn't need to think about their steps. They gossiped the way people do when they've known each other forever, half teasing, half serious, full of little side comments and laughter that came and went like waves. Most of it didn't reach me. They spoke in Creole so fast that I could only catch pieces here and there. A word, a phrase, a name, then another burst of speech that went right past me. I learned to read their faces instead. The eye rolls, the little coughs, the sharp sucking of teeth that could mean anything from disapproval to disbelief. It was like watching a show where I didn't understand the script, but still knew what the scene was supposed to feel like. One detail stood out every time: the gold crosses. Nearly every woman in my family wore one. When they leaned forward to stir a pot or turned their heads to talk, those crosses swung and flashed in the light. They caught my attention like tiny pendulums. Even then I understood they meant something important, but I didn't understand why it mattered so much. I knew I was Catholic because that's what my mother said we were, because that's what we did on Sundays, because that's what our family had always done. It wasn't a choice, it was like a name. My aunt was different. Everyone in my family had a role, and her role was the one people didn't say out loud. She was the one they watched, the one they warned you about in a half-joking way. The black sheep, always at the edge of family conversations, always treated like she brought something uncomfortable into the room. It wasn't because she was rude or mean. It wasn't because she didn't show up. It was because of what they called her ways. Magic, they'd say, like it was a dirty word. Back then, I didn't know what voodoo meant. I'd heard adults say it in the same tone they used for bad news, or for people they didn't trust. I didn't have the context to separate truth from fear. I only knew my mother didn't like me asking questions, and she especially didn't like me being alone with that aunt for too long. But kids notice everything, even when adults think they don't. My aunt knew I was curious, and she liked that about me. She didn't talk down to me. She didn't act like I was too young to understand. She treated me like I was already part of something bigger, like I belonged to a story I hadn't heard yet. One evening, she told me about her hands. She held them out in front of me and said she could see people's lives through the lines in their palms. Not just vague stuff like, you'll meet someone or you'll have a long life. She said she could see real things, paths, choices, pieces of the future, pieces of the past. She said it came to her like magnetic waves. I believed her immediately, not because I'd seen proof, but because she spoke with a certainty adults usually don't have when they're lying, and because there was something about her, something steady, that made it feel like she wasn't trying to impress me. She was just telling me what was true. My parents hated it. If they caught her showing me anything, my mom would shut it down fast. She'd pull me away and tell me not to listen. She'd tell my aunt to stop filling my head. The arguments always had the same heat to them, fear mixed with anger, like my mom was afraid that just hearing those things would invite something into our lives. My aunt would just shrug like she'd heard it all before. "We are special," she told me once, softly, like she was sharing a secret. "It's in our blood." Sunday service was non-negotiable in our house. Even in Haiti, even with the heat and the long walk and the crowded church, we went. I sat there listening to sermons I barely understood, watching candles flicker, watching people bow their heads and cross themselves with practiced motions. The whole room smelled like sweat and perfume and incense, and the prayers sounded like a single voice when everyone spoke at once. But even then, I kept thinking about what my aunt said. After church, I asked her, "How would I know if I have it?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at me with a calm expression that made me feel like she was listening to something that wasn't being said. Then she smiled, small and sure. "You're gonna know," she said. I've replayed that line 1,000 times. Now, when I try to talk about what happened later, I get tangled up in my own words. I keep saying "that night," and I know it's confusing. I'm not trying to be vague. It's more like my memory doesn't hold time the way it should. When people ask me where I was or what day it was, I genuinely don't know what to tell them. The events stick with me, but the edges of them blur, like they happened in a place that didn't have clocks. Before it got bad, it started small. I was tired all the time. Not normal tired, not I stayed up late tired. This was heavy, deep tired that didn't go away even after a full night of sleep. I'd wake up and feel like I'd never really rested. My limbs would feel thick. My head would feel stuffed with cotton. Then it turned into something worse. There were moments in bed when I couldn't move. I'd be awake, at least I thought I was, and I would be stuck staring at the ceiling or the corner of the room. I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't roll over. I couldn't even lift my hand. I could breathe, but it felt shallow, like my chest didn't want to rise fully. And I would see things. Sometimes it was a shape at the edge of my vision, like a darker patch of darkness. Sometimes it was closer. The worst times were when it felt like something was in the room with me and I couldn't look away. I'd try to blink it out, try to convince myself it wasn't real, but the fear stayed in my body like a sickness. I'd lie there trapped, watching, waiting for it to move. After a while, people started noticing how tired I was. My mom started watching me like she was counting my breaths. My aunt would study me the way she studied palms, the way she studied people, like she could see the outline of a problem before it fully arrived. Not long after, I was diagnosed with narcolepsy. The doctors explained it in clean, clinical terms. Sleep disorder, sudden sleep episodes, disrupted REM patterns. They offered medicine. They told my mother what signs to watch for. They told me I needed routines, better sleep hygiene, less stress. I nodded. I listened. I took the pills. But even then, I didn't believe the diagnosis covered all of it. It explained the drowsiness, maybe. It explained why I could feel half awake and half asleep. It didn't explain the feeling that something else was happening through me. I kept thinking maybe nothing was wrong with me at all. Maybe I just needed better sleep. Maybe it was school stress. I was trying to keep up with classes, trying to prove I was fine, trying to push myself harder when my body clearly didn't want to cooperate. I'd stay up late to finish work, then punish myself for being tired the next day, then stay up again because I was behind. It was a loop. And my aunt never judged me for it. That's part of why I liked being around her. When I stayed at her place, she didn't look at me like I was broken. She looked at me like I was unfolding. My mom always made sure I wore my cross when I went to my aunt's house, just in case. She never said what the case was. She'd just press it into my palm and close my fingers around it, like she was sealing me shut. My aunt lived in a place that felt quieter than my grandmother's. It wasn't silent. Haiti is never fully silent, but it had a different kind of stillness, like the walls held secrets and didn't mind holding more. When I visited, she'd make me tea and watch me carefully, like she was looking at the space around my face instead of my face itself. There was a night, again, I'm sorry I keep calling it that, when she looked at me in a way that made me uncomfortable at first. Not scared exactly, more exposed, like she was seeing something behind my eyes. It felt like she was waiting for me to catch up to something she already knew. "You're tired," she said. I told her I wasn't. I don't know why I lied. Maybe I didn't want to admit it. Maybe I didn't want her to be right. Maybe I was afraid of what would happen if I said yes. She hummed low in her throat, like she was agreeing with someone I couldn't hear. Then she said, very quietly, "Your dreams are waking up before you do." I didn't understand what that meant, and I still don't. Not fully. But the moment she said it, the room changed. Not in a dramatic way. No lights flickering, no doors slamming. It was subtler than that. The air felt heavier. The shadows in the corners seemed more awake, like they were listening. Even the sound outside, the distant voices, the far-off motorbikes, felt muted, like the world had leaned back to make room for something else. That's when I saw it. Something moved behind her shoulder. At first, it looked like a shadow crossing another shadow, a dark shape sliding where it shouldn't. My brain tried to dismiss it, tried to name it. Someone walking past a window, a curtain moving, a trick of the light. But there was no window behind her shoulder. There was only wall. My heartbeat got so loud, I felt like I could hear it in my ears. Everything stretched out, like time slowed down just enough for me to notice each detail. The shadow leaned in, and for a moment I had the strongest, clearest feeling that it knew me. Not like it recognized my face, like it recognized something deeper, like it had been waiting for me, or like it had been with me without me noticing. That was the worst part, the certainty. The certainty that something had happened through me, not by me. I don't remember doing anything. I don't remember standing up or reaching for anything. My memory skips like a scratched DVD. One moment I was sitting there with my aunt, and the next moment there was a gap I couldn't fill, like time had been cut out of my life with scissors. I remember blinking and realizing my hands were in front of me. Then I felt the warmth running down my wrists. It took my brain a second to understand what that meant. Warmth like water, but thicker. Warmth that didn't belong there. Blood. I stared at my wrists and saw red streaks, and I couldn't connect it to any action. I didn't remember pain. I didn't remember a blade. I didn't remember choosing anything. I only remembered that shadow leaning in and the feeling that it had touched something inside me. My aunt didn't scream. She didn't panic the way my mother would have. She leaned forward fast, took my hands gently but firmly, and pressed something against my skin. Cloth. Maybe part of her dress. I don't remember the exact fabric, only the pressure and the smell of herbs and smoke that clung to her house. Her voice stayed low. "It's in our blood," she said again, but this time it didn't sound like pride. It sounded like a warning, like a fact she wished wasn't true. And I remember thinking, in a strange, detached way, that I hadn't felt tired until she said I was tired. Like the word itself unlocked something in me. After that, everything became doctors and explanations. My family decided I needed therapy. They didn't frame it as a choice. They framed it like an emergency. They said I was seeing things because of stress, because of religion, because of confusion between belief and reality. Someone used the phrase religious psychosis, and the moment I heard that, I felt embarrassed and angry at the same time. They wanted my aunt to be the problem. They wanted to put a label on her and close the door. They wanted to make it simple. She filled my head with superstition, and now I was imagining shadows. But the problem was that my aunt wasn't a story I'd been told. She was a person I'd sat with, a person who'd looked at me like she already knew what I was going to become. Even now, years later, they still ask me questions in that careful tone. They ask if I really believe she was psychic. They ask if I still believe in all that. They ask if I understand that narcolepsy can cause hallucinations, that sleep paralysis can feel like a presence in the room, that the mind can create terrifying things when it's half asleep. I understand all of that. I've read about it. I've listened to doctors. I've taken medication. I've tried to explain it to myself in ways that make the world feel safe again. But I also remember the way my aunt looked at me. I remember her humming like she was answering someone I couldn't hear. I remember the shadow moving where no shadow should have been. And I remember the warm trickle down my wrists and the fear that came with realizing time had gone missing. So yes, when they ask, I still tell them the truth. Yeah, I still believe she was psychic. And some nights, when I wake up with that familiar heavy drowsiness sitting on my chest like a weight, I don't think my dreams are the problem. I think my aunt was right. I think my dreams are waking up before I do. Story 5. There's a building on the far edge of my university's campus that no one will admit is real. I spent months trying to figure out why. I still don't have a clean answer, and that's part of what scares me. I go to our university, a mid-sized state school in New Jersey. I'm still a student there. If you also go here and you know what I'm talking about, you'll understand why I'm not using my name or the school's full name. I want to be honest before I get into this. I don't have hard proof for most of what I'm about to say. What I do have is a building that physically exists, a very obvious silence around it that feels intentional, and a pile of secondhand stories from people who don't know each other and don't have any reason to coordinate. If you believe the rest is up to you. This is about the Triad Apartments and the fact that you've probably never heard that name, even if you've gone here for years, is exactly the point. I've been at this university for almost 3 years. I've done the official campus tour, sat through orientation, lived in the dorms, and dealt with housing staff and RAs more than any normal person should. In all that time, I never heard the words Triad Apartments once. Not in the housing portal, not in the campus map PDF they hand every freshman, not in Savitz Hall where the housing office is. Nowhere. I didn't discover Triad in some dramatic way. I heard about it by accident. Junior year, someone on my floor mentioned it quietly, like they weren't sure they should be saying it at all. Then they immediately changed the subject. When I asked what they meant, they looked genuinely uncomfortable and said something like, "It's just a thing people say. I don't actually know anything." That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because if something is just a rumor, people usually laugh when you ask about it. They don't get tense, they don't shut down, they don't act like you asked a question that's going to cause them trouble. So I started looking. The first thing I did was try to find it on a map. Try it yourself. Pull up Apple Maps and search Triad Apartments, then Google Maps, then the university's official interactive map, then the PDF campus map they give incoming students that lists every building, every lot, every dorm, every dining hall, every academic building, all of it. It isn't there, not labeled, not referenced, not even as an old building name. Nothing. And that's the first thing that made my stomach drop, because the building does exist. It's not a myth. It's not a maybe. I've stood in front of it in the daylight. I've walked up to it. It's a real set of buildings on university property. Every other residential building is labeled on some kind of map. Every commuter lot, every little surface parking area, the weird little annex buildings nobody uses, they're all marked. Triad isn't. It's absent in a way that doesn't feel accidental. It feels like someone went through and made sure it wouldn't show up. So I started asking people. Carefully. I didn't blast it in group chats. I didn't post about it on my real social media. I asked in ways that wouldn't make anyone defensive. First, I asked an RA, someone I've known since freshman year, someone I actually like. I asked him if he'd ever heard of Triad Apartments. He paused for just a little too long before saying no. When I pushed, he said he'd heard the name maybe once, but didn't know where it was, didn't know what it was used for, and that I should probably ask someone in Savitz. That wasn't a normal answer. People either know something or they don't. They don't usually answer like they're picking their words. So I went to Savitz. I asked a housing staff member if they knew what Triad Apartments was. She looked at me like I was confused and said they weren't familiar with that name, and then asked if I was sure I had the right campus. When I said yes and described roughly where I'd heard it was located, she told me she'd look into it and get back to me. She never did. I tried again with someone else, but I framed it differently. I said I was looking into the history of campus residential buildings for a class project, and I wanted to know about older facilities. This time, the answer changed, but not in a helpful way. She told me there were older residential buildings no longer in use and pending evaluation, and if I wanted formal documentation, I could submit a records request. The way she said it sounded practiced, like she'd said that exact sentence before, like it was the approved way to end that conversation. So I submitted the records request. Weeks later, I got a response. It said the building had been decommissioned from residential use because of recurring infrastructure concerns, including drainage issues and confirmed presence of environmental hazards. That was it. No dates, no timeline, no details, no explanation of what happened to the students who supposedly lived there before it was decommissioned. Just a neat little sentence that could cover almost anything. Drainage issues, environmental hazards, a whole residential complex scrubbed from every map, and that's the official answer. Here's where it is, because I think you should know how real it is. Start near Business Hall, the building on our campus that's furthest out in that direction. Keep walking past the last normal parking lot on that side, the one that's strangely still maintained. Cars still parked there, lines still painted, lights still working. But there's almost no foot traffic and no real reason for it to be active if nothing else is out there. Go past that lot, cross the train tracks. After that, there are no signs pointing anywhere, no pathway markers, no lights, no campus boundary signs, no little campus maps posted on poles like the rest of school has. Most people who walk that way assume they've reached the edge of university property and turn back. If you keep going, Triad is there. 3 connected apartment-style buildings, sitting alone like they were dropped there by mistake. No other dorms nearby. No other academic buildings. No student life centers. Nothing. It takes effort to reach it, and it takes even more effort to keep walking when every normal signal that says you're still on campus disappears. The first time I saw it in person, I stood there for a long minute just trying to process what I was looking at. Because the most unsettling part wasn't even the building itself. It was the fact that it felt like I wasn't supposed to be seeing it. Like this was something that existed, but only if you went out of your way to find it. Like the university wanted it to be an object that you could walk past for years without ever naming. After that, I started collecting whatever information I could, mostly from talking to people. I want to say again, I can't verify most of what I was told. Some of it is probably exaggerated. Some of it might be wrong. Some of it might be the kind of story that changes every time it gets repeated. But I've now heard certain details repeated by people who don't know each other in language that was almost identical. That's what made it hard to dismiss. The consistent part is this. Triad used to house students normally. At some point, nobody agrees on the exact year. I've heard anything from early 2010s to around 2017. It stopped. Quietly, no announcement, no big email. It just disappeared from the housing portal and students stopped being assigned to it. Then, according to what people say, it was repurposed. Not officially, not in a way that would show up in a campus newsletter or a press release. The word I heard most often, whispered like it was dangerous to even say, was isolation. The story is that students who were flagged for mental health crises or behavioral issues were taken there and held there. Not like jail exactly, not like punishment, more like containment. Like the school had a place they could put you if you became a problem that couldn't be handled in a normal dorm. The most specific detail I kept hearing was a 2-week minimum. You stayed there at least 2 weeks. You couldn't leave. You couldn't communicate normally. Families supposedly got a form letter, something about voluntary wellness support, something that didn't say where their kid actually was. I'm not claiming any of that is fact. I'm telling you what people told me and what they told me in almost the same words. I have not found anyone willing to say out loud that they were personally taken there. Nobody will admit that. Not to me, anyway. But the story doesn't end there. The darkest part, the part that gets told like a warning, not like gossip, is about 2020, when COVID hit and the campus emptied out. According to the rumor, something happened at Triad during that period. Accounts don't match on the details. Some people say one resident had been kept there far longer than 2 weeks and finally snapped from the isolation. Some people say what happened was violent. Some people say 2 other students in containment, 1 male and 1 female, didn't make it out. I'm not writing names. I'm not turning this into a true crime post. If any piece of that is real, those people deserve better than having their names thrown into a story online. After that, the story goes, Triad was shut down completely. Staff gone. Whatever the project was, ended. Records cleaned up or buried or rewritten in language that doesn't point back to the building. And now, when you ask, you get excuses. Flooding, mold, COVID delays, demolition plans, pending evaluation. Different versions depending on who you talk to. Here's the thing about mold and flooding. Those are reasons to close a building. They're even reasons to keep it closed. They are not reasons to erase a building from every map and pretend its name doesn't exist. They're not reasons for housing staff to give you careful scripted answers. They're not reasons for an RA to go quiet the moment you say triad. That's the part that stuck with me. The silence wasn't casual, it felt maintained. Eventually I did what I probably shouldn't have done. I went out there at night. I'm not doing it again. It wasn't the fun kind of scary. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't, wow, abandoned building, creepy vibes. It was the kind of wrong that's hard to explain. The kind where your brain keeps telling you a place is off limits, even though there's no fence, no sign, no guard. The weirdest part is the transition. On campus, even late at night, there's always some kind of background noise. Someone talking outside a dorm, music leaking from a window, a car door closing, the hum of lights, the distant sound of traffic, something. Out there, once you cross those tracks, it's like the university sound just stops, not fades, stops. Behind you, that parking lot is still there, still active, cars sitting under functioning lights, and in front of you, it's just dark, open space and the outline of buildings that shouldn't be that far away from everything else. Triad itself didn't even look like a student apartment complex to me. The shape, the color, the blankness of it. It reminded me more of some kind of facility, like a small psych ward, than any place students would live by choice. And the distance mattered. On our campus, everything is packed together. You can usually walk from one building to another in under a minute. Triad felt deliberately placed outside that pattern, like someone wanted it separated, like if something happened there, it wouldn't spill into the rest of campus. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes staring up at the windows. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I told myself it was abandoned so there wouldn't be anything to see. Then a light came on. 3rd floor. It wasn't a normal warm lamplight. It was a sick, flickering fluorescent, yellowish and uneven, like an old hallway light in a building that's supposed to be closed. In that light, I saw a silhouette. It was perfectly still, face close to the glass, like it was pressed against the window, watching the parking lot, watching me. It didn't look like a ghost, not in the traditional sense. It looked like a person who had forgotten how to be a person, like a body that was still alive but didn't know what to do with itself besides stare. It didn't move until I moved. When I stepped back, it vanished, and the light cut off instantly. Not like someone switched it off. No click, no gradual dim, just darkness. I turned to run and almost tripped. On the other side of the road, closer than I expected, there was a little memorial, a cross, flowers, glass shards that caught moonlight, a name, small objects left behind like someone had been coming there quietly for a long time. I jumped back, heart pounding, and spun to look at the building again. Another light was on now, on a different floor, on a different side. That's when I ran. I didn't stay to see who else might be watching. After that, I started mentioning the lights carefully to other students, the same way I'd asked about the building in the first place. Not in big groups, one-on-one, quietly. And that's when I realized it wasn't just me. I've now talked to 5 different students, different years, no connection to each other, who independently mentioned seeing lights in Triad's windows. Not every night, not on a predictable schedule, but sometimes. Late, upper floors, after midnight, lights that move, sometimes shadows. The university's official position, as far as I can tell, is that the building is decommissioned and awaiting whatever comes next. That could mean nothing, or it could mean the building isn't as empty as they want everyone to believe. And the worst thought I can't shake is this. If the rumors are even partly true, if triad was ever used to isolate students away from everyone else, then decommissioned might only mean not acknowledged. It might only mean not documented. It might only mean don't ask. People say you can still feel what happened there, not in a dramatic ghost story way, more like the way some places hold on to weight, like the air in a room remembers things even after the people are gone, like a space can soak up fear and keep it. Like Triad has been holding something since 2020 and nobody has let it out. The lights still come on. Nobody explains them. Nobody seems to go check. And the university, from what I've seen, would prefer you never walk in that direction at all. Past the operational parking lot that shouldn't matter. Past the train tracks. Past the point where campus stops sounding like campus. I don't know what happened at Triad. I don't know what's still happening, if anything is. I don't think I'm going to find out. I'm not sure I want to anymore, but I think you should know it's there. Story 6. I was still a child the first time I stepped onto that boat. I look back on that moment now and I feel something heavier than fear. Regret, mostly. The kind that sits in your chest for years and never really leaves. I still don't understand what made me do it. I can tell myself I was curious, that kids do reckless things, that docks are full of strange sights and louder strangers. But if I'm being honest, what I remember most clearly isn't the boat. It's the whisper, soft, beautiful in a way that almost makes you lean toward it without thinking. I can still hear it sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet enough for my mind to start replaying the past. I don't know if that sound is real anymore, or if I've just carried it so long that my brain learned how to imitate it. I know I was a child when I found myself near the docks. I wasn't alone. I was with friends. At least I assume I was, because I remember running and laughing and the sense of a game being played. But their names are gone from my head now, wiped away the way chalk disappears in rain. It's like that part of my life belongs to someone else. My mother hated the docks. She warned me about them constantly. She said they were crawling with con men, drunks, and what she called ill folk, a phrase that meant anyone she didn't trust and didn't want near her child. Her warnings weren't gentle either. They came with lectures, punishments, and that sharp disappointment only a parent can deliver. It didn't stop me. If anything, it made me bolder. Back then, I didn't have much control over anything. I was small, I was young, and my life ran on other people's rules. Sneaking down to the docks felt like stealing a piece of freedom. Every time my mother tried to scare me away, part of me wanted to go even more. It wasn't about the boats. It was about proving I could make one choice for myself. I think we were playing hide and seek that day. Whether I was hiding or seeking doesn't matter now. I just remember the motion of it, ducking between stacks of crates, squeezing past grown-ups, slipping through gaps I was small enough to fit through. That's when I heard it. A whisper that didn't sound like anyone I knew. It wasn't coming from the crowd. Not exactly. It felt closer than that, like it was inside the side of my head. Like some tiny spider had crawled into my ear and was speaking in a voice too soft to catch. I couldn't understand the words. I only knew it was gentle and irritating at the same time, like a song you can't get out of your head. The more I tried to ignore it, the more my attention snapped back to it. It pulled at me, so I followed it. I pushed through groups of people, stumbled over loose boards, stepped around ropes and boxes. The docks were loud and busy, full of shouting and laughter, and the slap of water against wood. But that whisper stayed clear, steady, like it had its own space inside the noise. Eventually I found the source, a small fishing boat, smaller than any other boat tied up nearby. It looked almost pathetic next to the larger vessels, like something a poor man would use, or something meant for a single person to disappear in, without anyone noticing. The wood was dark and swollen from years of seawater. The paint if it had ever been painted, was long gone. The whisper was louder here, more like a raspy call now, not screaming, not demanding, but insistently present. The wind picked up and pushed at my back, nudging me toward the boat like a hand that didn't want to be seen. For a moment, I resisted. I remember that clearly. My feet planted, my stomach tightening. I knew I shouldn't step on it. I knew my mother's voice would explode in my head if she saw me. But the whisper felt so close, so inviting. And the boat seemed to lean toward me in a way that made no sense, as if it wanted me. I pushed my doubts down hard and climbed aboard. The second both my feet landed on the deck, the whisper stopped. It didn't fade away. It didn't drift off into the wind. It cut out completely, like someone had shut a door. For a few seconds there was only silence, and that silence made my skin prickle. Then I started walking around the boat, trying to make sense of it. I told myself I'd just look, just for a moment, and then climb off and run back to my friends. Perfect. I moved like a feather. Soon walking wasn't enough. I started hopping, then leaping. My laughter bounced around in that empty place, coming back to me in a way that made it feel like I wasn't alone. I picked up rocks and threw them, and watched them drift down slowly, like paper falling through still air. Cartwheels and handstands flashed through my mind. I felt unstoppable for those minutes, maybe hours. I forgot the fear. I forgot my mother. I forgot home. I felt free in a way I'd never felt before, like nothing could touch me out there. And then the boat dropped, not drifted, not sank, plunged. So fast my stomach lifted into my chest. I couldn't even scream. The fall stole the air from me. The only thing keeping me on the boat was my grip. Pure fear locked into my muscles. The world became pitch black. In that darkness, my fear grew bigger. If I couldn't see where I was going, I could imagine anything. I thought I was dying. I thought this was it, the end of a life already ruined. But then the descent slowed. I lost my grip and slammed onto the deck, gasping, waiting for water to crush down on top of me. It never did. That was the strangest part. I could still breathe. The air was still there, even though I knew the boat had gone down. Down into the sea, down past light, down into depth. I sat in darkness for what felt like forever, refusing to move. The silence wasn't quiet anymore. It had become a low, constant hum, like a drumbeat in the air, vibrating against my bones and making my nerves jump. Then a light appeared outside the boat. A small blue glow, soft and cold. Another appeared, then another. Soon the darkness was dotted with tiny lights all around, like floating embers underwater. I could finally see enough to understand something impossible. The boat was inside some kind of bubble, suspended in deep black water, and in the distance I heard sounds, groans, chirps, clicking noises, coming closer. Then the creatures arrived. They weren't like any fish I'd ever seen. They weren't like any animal I'd ever imagined. They moved through the water like living shapes of light, glowing in blues and reds and oranges and purples. Some were huge, drifting past like slow ships. Others were small and fast, darting around like curious birds. Some of them were almost transparent, like I could see through their bodies. I could see strange inner shapes that looked like bones or hearts, but not arranged like anything human or animal. They swirled around the boat as if they'd been waiting for someone to arrive, as if my presence was entertainment. A massive one rushed past and shook the boat so hard it nearly knocked me over, but I didn't care. I was terrified and amazed at the same time. Even more than the moon, this sight burned itself into my memory. Then I remembered why I was there. I hadn't come for wonder. I'd come for answers. I tore through the boat like a madman. I opened barrels, flipped over blankets, pried at loose boards until my fingers ached. I searched above deck and below, every inch, desperate to find a hidden mechanism, a strange symbol, anything that would explain how this thing was doing what it did. There was nothing. It was just a fishing boat. That truth hit me harder than the fear. There was no lever to pull, no rope to cut, no engine hidden under the boards. The boat was ordinary in every way that mattered except for what it could do. As my searching slowed, the glowing creatures drifted away one by one, sliding back into darkness as if a show had ended. The lights faded until there was nothing left but black water and that low hum. I sat down on the soggy deck and hugged my knees. The silence felt like it was sitting beside me, enjoying itself. I laughed once, a short, bitter sound. Because the whole thing was so ridiculous it almost seemed funny. That laugh turned into a sob. The sob turned into choking, ugly crying. When I finally got control of myself again, there was only darkness and the hum. I lay on my side, tears mixing with seawater, salt on salt, until I couldn't tell what came from me and what came from the ocean. I must have fallen asleep. I woke up again under the sun, soaking wet on the boat at the docks. The normal sounds of the world around me. I didn't move right away. I just lay there, staring up, feeling defeated. Eventually, I sat up and scratched my face. My fingers caught on hair, more than before. That was enough to tell me what had happened. More years were gone. I had already returned once as a grown man. Now I could feel the weight of age settling deeper into my bones. I stepped off the boat slowly and started walking home, taking detours through town, staring at buildings, signs, faces that didn't match my memories. I couldn't tell whether the people I passed were strangers or old friends erased by time. When I reached my house, I hesitated. It looked familiar, but more worn again, like the world kept moving while I kept losing time. My chest tightened at the thought of my mother. Losing her son once had nearly destroyed her. What would losing him twice have done? I knocked 3 times. I waited. I didn't knock again. I turned away, ready to leave because I couldn't face it. That's when the door swung open. A man stood there, older than me, with tired eyes that held a sadness so deep it looked like it had lived there for decades. For a moment, I thought I saw a faint smile in those eyes, like he knew exactly who I was. I asked if he had seen my mother. The faint smile vanished. Something hard replaced it. Anger, maybe, or a protective kind of hatred. He stepped outside and shut the door behind him quietly, like he didn't want anyone inside to hear. He stared into me, not at my face, but at something deeper, and when he spoke, his voice was flat and sharp. He told me what my mother had lived through. He said she lost her husband, my father, not long after I was born. Then she lost me as a child. He said it broke her in a way nothing could fix. And then somehow I came back, and she tried to live again, even though I was quiet, hollow, barely eating, barely speaking. Just my presence was enough for her. Then I disappeared a second time. No, he said. I left. He emphasized that word like he wanted it to cut. He told me she had finally moved on after years, that she found a way to survive my absence, that she chose to believe, for her own sanity, that wherever I was happy. That hope, twisted as it was, let her breathe again. And if I came back now, older and ruined, I'd only reopen every wound she'd forced herself to close. He threatened me too, not with a weapon, but with the truth. He made it clear that if I went inside, if I tried to bring myself back into her life again, I would be doing it for me, not for her. How selfish of me, he said, to come back only to share my suffering. I stood there and listened until my stomach felt hollow. I don't know if he was right. I still don't. By that point, right and wrong felt like childish concepts, like rules that belonged to people who still had time. But I nodded anyway. I turned away. I walked back into town with nowhere to go. I ended up in a dark alley and sank down against a damp wall. The ground smelled like garbage and old rain. Rodents scurried nearby. It felt like the place I belonged because I didn't feel human anymore. I felt like something that had been stripped of a real life and left with only hunger and memory. I had nothing. No childhood. No adulthood built step by step. No story that made sense. Just these missing chunks of time, these empty spaces where a life should have been. And in that filth and anger, another thought grew. If I couldn't get my life back, I could at least punish the thing that stole it. The boat. I broke into a shop that night and stole oil and candles. I didn't care about consequences. Jail would have been a normal punishment, and normal sounded comforting. I carried the supplies to the docks with my heart hammering, not from fear, but from purpose. The whisper didn't come to me this time. It was like the boat knew I was coming and didn't want to call me. That only made me more certain. When I reached it, I climbed aboard and poured oil over every surface I could reach. I soaked the deck, the sides, anything the oil would cling to. I didn't have much, but I told myself fire didn't need much if it caught properly. Then I stepped off the boat, lit a candle, and threw it onto the sail. Flames rose fast, bright and hungry. Heat hit my face like a slap. The fire roared so loud it drowned out everything else. For a moment, I felt something close to joy. Not happiness, but satisfaction, like I was finally watching my captor die. I refused to look away, even when my eyes watered and my skin stung from the heat. I wanted to witness the end. But as the flames died down, my satisfaction drained away. The boat was untouched, not scorched, not charred, not even blackened at the edges. It looked exactly as it always had, damp and shabby and completely unharmed. as if the fire had only been a trick of light. The boat creaked gently, and the sound of it made my stomach twist, because it almost sounded like laughter. I screamed, rage ripping through my throat, and jumped back onto the deck. I wanted to smash it apart with my bare hands, to rip up boards, to tear it to pieces. I didn't get the chance. The moment my feet hit the deck, the boat shot upward. The force slammed me down like an invisible weight. I couldn't stand. I could barely breathe. Seawater pooled and splashed as the vessel rose faster and faster, and I knew exactly what I'd done. In my anger, I had stepped onto it again. I had made the same mistake, only now I'd done it on purpose. Eventually, the pressure eased. Control returned to my limbs. I pushed myself up, soaked and shaking, and looked out over the front of the boat. We were racing through the stars. Wind tore at my face, cold and heavy, almost suffocating. The wood under my hands was brittle and wet, splinters biting into my skin as I gripped the railing hard enough to hurt myself. I was surrounded by endless points of light, millions of stars, scattered across darkness so deep it felt bottomless. As a child, I used to stare up at the night sky and feel small in a comforting way, like the world was bigger than my worries. Out there among the stars, the lights didn't feel bigger, they felt farther. Space didn't feel like wonder anymore. It felt like loneliness made physical. That's when I understood why people call it a void. It isn't empty because there's nothing there. It's empty because of what it does to you inside. I let go of the railing and stared down at the shallow pool of seawater on the deck. My reflection stared back, older, bitterer, and I couldn't find anything left in myself that wanted to scream or cry. I just closed my eyes and waited for sleep to take me. When I woke again, the sun was beating down on me. My clothes were damp. My body felt heavy in a way it hadn't before. When I tried to sit up, my bones cracked and my muscles ached like they were made of rusted wire. Pain shot through my back, sharp and spreading. I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled, spotted, withered. I tried to stand and failed, collapsing back onto the deck with a groan that didn't sound like me. My voice was deep, hoarse, and rough, like gravel. Then I heard small footsteps and startled voices nearby. Children. A spike of panic cut through me, sudden and clear. Not for myself. For them. I couldn't let them board that boat. I couldn't let them hear the whisper, couldn't let them make the mistake I made. I thrashed and screamed, yelling at them in my ragged voice, throwing every curse I could pull from my mouth. They squealed and ran, terrified by the sight of a crazed old man flailing on a wet deck. A few older men came toward me next, pushing past where the children had been. I screamed at them too, warning them, begging them not to step onto the boat. I splashed water, threw whatever my hands found, desperate. They didn't listen, or they didn't understand. They grabbed me, surprisingly gentle, and dragged me away from the boat. I kicked and fought, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I thought if I fought hard enough they'd give up and leave me there where I could guard the boat. They were too strong and too kind. They led me into a nearby bar. Inside, one of them argued quietly with the bartender, and then they took me into a back room. They gave me a change of clothes, clean fabric, even sandals. I changed slowly, every movement making my joints complain. There was a mirror in the corner. I stood in front of it and stared. The body looking back at me was thin and sagging, skin loose in places and tight in others. Wrinkles and age spots covered hands that used to be small. I felt disgust rise in my throat, not just at the image but at the meaning behind it. I wanted to smash the mirror, but I knew it would only leave me bleeding. When I went back out, 2 men were waiting. Was the bartender, the other the man who'd led me inside. They looked concerned, like they didn't know what to do with me. They sat me at the bar and brought food and water. They asked questions. Where was I from? What happened? Did I need someone called? I ate slowly without really tasting anything. I nodded once or twice, grunted once or twice, but I couldn't give them answers that would fit in their world. When I finished eating, I drank the water in one loud swallow, then stood up and thanked them. The kind man tried to stop me, maybe to ask one more question, maybe to tell me to stay. The bartender put a hand on his shoulder and held him back, like he understood there was no point. I walked out. The streets felt like a word I couldn't quite remember. I knew it was my town. I knew the shape of it. But everything looked unfamiliar, like time had repainted it while I was gone. I didn't look at anyone as I walked. I didn't want to see recognition or confusion. I didn't want to be seen. There was only one place I knew I could go, the cemetery. I knew where my father was buried because I'd visited his grave as a boy. I knew my mother would be placed beside him. I walked there with a calm that felt fake, like my body was moving while my mind stayed somewhere far away. When I reached the marker, I lowered myself down slowly, crossing my legs with a grunt as pain stabbed through my hips. For a moment, I couldn't cry. I just sat there picking at blades of grass, staring at the stone. Then I started talking. I told my mother a lie. I built her the life she deserved for me, the life she might have imagined when she held me as a baby. I told her I ran off to the city and got a good job in an office. I told her I met girls, dated a few, and finally found the one. I told her I married, bought a house, had 3 kids and a dog. I told her my children grew up. I told her they came to visit me with their own kids. I told her my wife passed away and our whole family attended her funeral. I told her I was only stopping by to say hello before heading back home, because my eldest son was on vacation, and I was babysitting my grandchildren. I made it sound warm and ordinary. I made it sound real. And somewhere near the end, the lie cracked open. My voice broke. I started sobbing, ugly and hard, because I ate the life I'd never lived like it was right in front of me, close enough to touch, and still completely impossible. I bent forward over the grass and cried for my mother, and for the child I had been, and for all the years the boat had taken, one trip at a time.